गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्मा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः.
Yesterday, in our study of Western philosophy, we reached the place where the sophists appeared on the scene. I would like you to have an idea of how Greek art and literature developed then. It was the heyday of Greek culture and civilization. All their arts and literature prospered by leaps and bounds. The concept of tragedy and drama has come from there. Three very great ancient playwrights, as I told you, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, appeared on the scene. It was a very happy era. There weren't, of course, so many means of entertainment as we have today, but whatever they had was good enough and sumptuous. Usually there would be public enactment of dramas, free all. These days everything is paid. In those days it was free. A public drama would be staged on an occasion, and a selection would be made which drama to be enacted. Naturally, entries would be invited, playwrights would submit their plays for consideration, and whoever's drama was selected for enactment, he would naturally celebrate and throw a party. He would invite his friends, his relatives, and like this, they had a very merry time indeed. The banquet would be held. There would be an oblong table. All the guests would be seated on the table. The goblet of wine would pass from one to another, and it was a very lively occasion in the sense some theme would be thrown up for discussion and debate. They were all sitting on the table only. It was not an formal occasion, but any topic would crop up, say patriotism or virtue or honesty, any topic would crop up, and each one would express his opinion and ideas upon that theme and subject. There would be action and reaction, evaluation and re-evaluation, and the debate would go on. All this literature that we have access to today has come down to us from such occasions only. In a day or two, you will reach Socrates in his study of Western philosophy, and you will also get to know the most ardent student of Socrates was one Plato. He would take down notes of these discussions. They are called the dialogues of Plato. Dialogue means the most intimate form of conversation. Most of them have been lost in time, but quite some have come down to us. And that is how we have access to the temper and quality of those times. They have come down to us. Very lively debates. The chief camps were two only, one led by the Sophists and the other by Socrates, the teacher of Plato. People would express their opinion unreservedly, and a lively discussion would follow. It went on like this. They enjoyed life immensely. And naturally, since Socrates was the teacher of Plato, the last considered opinion Plato naturally would put in the mouth of his teacher. And as we can say, Socrates had the last laugh. That is how life went on. Now, who were these people, Sophists? I told you also, Will Durant. Will Durant has written a very good, very popular book, The Story of Philosophy. I would wish each one of you to read it, if possible. It is written for people like you only, the layman, not professional students of philosophy, because a very important aspect of philosophy, namely epistemology, the theory of knowledge, he has not discussed. Anyway, if you can get hold of the book, read it. It is very interesting reading. Traveling teachers of wisdom, traveling because they moved from one Greek city-state to another, they kept on doing like this, and that was their profession. They would be teaching students. You are to ask, who were these students? Naturally, they all came from the so-called elite class, the ruling class. Elite is our modern word. Ruling class may be the proper word for that age. Only they could afford. We are so blessed. Today we have what is known as the right to education, RTE, right to education. Right to information we are having since long. There was nothing imaginable like right to education in those days. Education belonged only to the few and the chosen. They would commission them to teach their students their words. And what did they teach? If you study the history of the world, history of mankind, you will find everywhere education has had two streams. One which supports and justifies the present dispensation of ruling, another which opposes it. That was a feudal society in those days, and the words of the feudal lords who were educated were supposed to perform two functions properly: the justification of their dispensation and the safety of the establishment. For this they needed studying two subjects: rhetoric and use of weaponry. Rhetoric is art of debate. You should be very clever in your arguments. You should be able to justify whatever you mean to support. In the art of use of weaponry, you must know how to use weapons, because society in those days was made that way. Personal security, you had to take care of yourself. And even otherwise also, ruler had to be a master in the use of weaponry. The sophists teach them these two things only: the art of debate and the use of weapons. Art of debate is a smart subterfuge to gain your point of view. It is not even often the pursuit of truth. It is even sometimes shameless justification of the line of action you hold dear. Before you can appreciate, I will tell you, the sophists opened the doors of reason, perhaps for the first time, and they dispensed with traditional morality entirely. They came out unabashedly with the dictum: what is morality? What is justice? What is truth? What is honesty? These are only words in your mouth. The primary object, the basic concept is your interest, your good, your profit. What profits you is good, what gains you is right. What does not profit you is not right, what does not gain you is not good. Very unabashedly, they came out with this dictum. It was a whole class of people, class of teachers, the sophists, not one. Callicles, Polus, Euthydemus, many people. It was a whole class of teachers. This is what jolted society in those days. And it appeared people had a free for all. You could do whatever you like, only you should be able to justify it. Meaning traditional morality, the idea of good and bad, right and wrong, is being rejected flagrantly to serve parochial interest of the individual. The important thing is here is the interest of the individual, not of the class. The greatest among the sophists was one Protagoras, P-R-O, pro, te, T-A, go, G-O, go, ras, R-A-S, Protagoras. You should be able to speak correctly so that you do not make a spelling mistake. Protagoras said very unreservedly, man is the measure of everything. Man, M-A-N, man, is the measure, the standard, the norm of everything. Man here means the individual man, not the class of man. Everything, good or bad, is considered with reference to the class of man. Whatever is acceptable to the class of man is good. Whatever is not acceptable to the class of man is not good. But the interest of the individual always collides with the interest of the general class. He said, man is the measure of everything. The individual good is the standard of everything, and that will decide. if you can take care of your individual interest, if you guard your particular interest, you are good, your action is moral, your action is acceptable. Very bluntly put, it means might is right. Might is right. And this concept has given birth to many philosophies later on, in the later day, devoted to the worship of strength, brute strength. The two world wars were fought on the inspiration of these philosophies. Hitler's inspiration was one Friedrich Nietzsche, who asserted the weak have no right to live on earth. The weak have no right to live on earth. That was Hitler's inspiration, Friedrich Nietzsche. All sorts of philosophies were born of this, but it was there. If you visualize the strong having everything to himself, leaving nothing to the weak, what the state of that society shall be. Students of political science may have read somewhere Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, visualized a state of society in which there was no political, at which there was no political authority, central political authority. And he uses a very apt phrase, a state of war of all against all. A state of war of one against all, of all against all. The state of war of all against all. Everybody fighting against everybody else because there was no central authority. And they later on decided and put up a central authority with certain conditions, and the concept of the state came into being that day. That way, it is one way of looking at things. That sort of anarchical situation, each doing as one wishes, would be a very dangerous proposition for society. But this is what happened then. The sophists had a merry day. They went with the ruling powers that be, and therefore they had a very easy and a comfortable time, because they were justifying the dispensation. All political authority in one way or the other depends upon what can be termed social loot. They also justified the political dispensation of the day, and they were much in demand. Their words were also educated that way. Philosophy has a branch known as logic. Logic means the art of right thinking, that your thinking should be right. For that, what laws you must follow, logic studies that. There are a large bulk of material in logic known as fallacies, formal fallacies and material fallacies. We shall not enter into it. I will just give you an example which came in later times. Baffling, confusing, all deliberately planned so that you score the point. Look at this argument. If a man marries, he has to take care of his wife and children, and therefore he is unhappy. If a man does not marry He does not have a wife and children to take care of him, and therefore he is unhappy. Either he marries or does not marry. Both ways he is unhappy. This is an argument. What would you do? Would you commit suicide? You marry or you don't marry, what would you do? Now look at the other side. If a man marries, he has a wife and children to take care of him, and therefore he is happy. If he does not marry, he does not have to take care of a wife and children, and therefore happy. Either he marries or does not marry, both ways he is happy. You proved both ways the man was unhappy. Here you prove both ways man is happy. What do you prove? This is a very clever argument. It has nothing to do with the truth of the material. Philosophy is supposed to deal primarily with truths. Well, that was not their concept. The sophists, they cater to expediency. What works and profits is right, what does not work and profit is not right. Very clearly, openly, and unabashedly, there is no shame about it. One need not be apologetic about it. This is what the sophists taught and asserted. Sophist term has come to be derogatory these days, but they were very brilliant people. They awakened the idea of reason in man, and reason can be used both ways, to justify or not to justify. But they had a heyday and a very comfortable place in society. Most of their students from the ruling class came from very opulent and powerful homes, and they had prominent say in society, and like this things went on. After a while, as action breeds reaction, there was a reaction thrown up here also, and people realized, if might were only right, then what will happen to right itself? It will meet its doom. It is not simply possible in society. It is not the interest of the individual because it does not rule for all time. It serves a particular moment only. It cannot have a sway upon society. And a lone voice grew up against it. His name was Socrates. And your study proper in this class starts from here. Your first question in the paper will be on Socrates, not on all that which went before him. He raised his voice of dissent against the sophistic approach and asserted it is all nonsense what the sophists assert. Truth is objective, morality is objective, right is objective. What do I mean when I say it is objective? Bluntly put, it simply means truth and morality and right are not articles in your pocket. They are independent of how you think about them. They have their own status and majesty, and it is your bounden duty, it is their majesty by nature itself, that you obey them and carry them out. The Sophists had a very powerful argument. After all, whom do we obey and whose command do we carry out? No two philosophers agree. It is the truth also, no two philosophers agree. Because if two people were to agree, they won't be philosophers. They may be anything else but not philosophers. So how do we go? Socrates said, it is true. These are opinions, there is conflict of opinion. Opinions vary, opinions differ. Opinions cater to the temporary stake or interest of man. But if you search down below, you will come across a common denominator, a common attribute in them all, and that common attribute is the objective morality or objective truth. You should go by that. That stands, that abides, that is subject to no ravages of time. This is what Socrates said. Now see, sophists teach one thing, Socrates teaches entirely another thing. Teacher meaning Socrates was not a professional teacher. You will get to know how he taught. There is bound to be animosity between the two. That way Socrates was one man only, but he had a band of followers. The youth of Athens was mad after Socrates. Who was this man Socrates? He was a non-entity nearly. A sculptor he was, statues of stone. Making statues of stone was his profession. He hardly made any statues. Early morning, every day almost, he would leave his home and would go to the marketplace, diaspora as it is called. He would meet anyone there known to him, accost him, wish him a very good morning, and engage him in conversation, any conversation, and be talking with him. There are countless incidents mentioned in books. If you read, you would feel happy having read it all. One of the encounters I will describe to you. There was a man known as Euthydemus. Euthydemus. Greek names are like this only. Euthydemus. He was being groomed by the sophists. Professional teachers were sophists only, so naturally they only taught. He was being groomed by the sophists. Socrates happened to meet him one morning, wished him a very good day, all this. And then he began talking about with him, asked him what his ambition was in life to be. Euthydemus said his ambition was to be a politician in life, to be a stakeholder in the political setup. Socrates wished him very well, all success, and then asked him in that case, he would be asked to dispense justice often at every step. Euthydemus very affirmatively said, yes, he knows he will be asked to dispense justice and he is prepared for it. Then Socrates asked him, in that case you must know what justice is. Naturally, Euthydemus says he knows very well what justice is. Then Socrates tells him, very well, we shall take a piece of paper, draw two columns in it. In the one column we shall put instances of injustice, in another column we shall put instances of justice. Euthydemus says, very well, very nice, let us do it and see. Socrates asks him, is cheating justice? He says, of course it is injustice. Then fraud, then falsehood, and like this. He says, yes, they are all instances of injustice. Then he says, there is an enemy country on your neighbor. We also have one, unfortunately. He is always pestering you, laying raids on your territory, looting you, this, that, and all these things, enslaving your people, and all the things that happen in a war, he has been doing to you. Once you fight a war with that country, and you happen to defeat that country, if you enslave it, is it just or unjust? Euthydemus says, of course it is just. He has always been torturing you. If you settle accounts, it is acceptable. Then he says, you loot his cattle, bring your goods to your own country. He says, yes, stealing and all these things are justified. They are just. Then he says, there is a general who is fighting a war. His troops are demoralized. They are on the verge of surrendering. He raises false hopes to the troops and tells them, see, reinforcements are arriving quickly in nearly no time. They should be able to stand up firm for a little while only. The replenishments will come and they will win the day. The troops are cheered up. They fight valiantly, they win the war. No replenishments were to come, nothing was to happen, no aid was expected, but still he cheated them into believing all this. They fought very well and they won the war. Is it right or wrong? Euthydemus says, yes, it is right. He says, there is a friend of yours who is a very temperamental man. Temperamental means very soon pleased and very soon angry. He owns a sword. He is in a state of temper one day. You fear he may kill himself with his sword. You quietly steal the sword. Is it right or wrong? Euthydemus says, it is right. Another instance, there is a child who is ill. He is given a medicine. The medicine is bitter. He does not like to take it. You teach him into believing, you cheat him into believing that if he were to take the medicine, he would be lulled to sleep, and in the sleep the fairy will visit him and dole out presents to him, and like this, The child believes it, takes the medicine and recovers. Is it right or wrong? He says, yes, it is right. Now see, this is apparently innocent conversation. But the way you lead the man to realize his ignorance is very brutal. You do not make a friend out of this, you only make an enemy out of this. What is Socrates driving at after all? He tries to impress upon us that we are using words which properly are called terms in philosophy. We are using terms without knowing their meaning. Euthydemus boasts that he knows all about justice, what justice is, and you saw the truth, he knew nearly nothing about what justice is. This way, Socrates was leading people to realize their ignorance, and that was making enemy of a man, not friend of any stranger. But the youth of Athens was mad after Socrates because his debate was marvelous. His argumentative ability was simply astounding. And at the end of the day, what happens? There were some political developments also. In Athens, a sort of sham democracy. The party opposed to his way of thinking and living came into ascendancy. And because Socrates himself was an irritant to them all, to the powers that be, they decided Socrates has lived for 70 years and now it was good enough time for him to leave the world and go. So, they brought 3 charges against Socrates. Corrupting the youth of the country. There were 3 charges brought against Socrates. The first charge was corrupting the youth of the country. Country means Athens. He was corruptizing the youth of the country, denying the gods of the Greek pantheon, denying the gods of the Greek pantheon. The Greeks also believed in a number of gods and goddesses as we do, that is known as the pantheon. He denied the gods of the Greek pantheon. He said there aren't so many gods, there is one God only. And bringing in his own God in their stead. Instead of the gods of the Greek pantheon, he brought in his own one God to be worshipped. These 3 charges were brought against Socrates: corrupting the youth of the country, denying the gods of the Greek pantheon, and substituting his own God in their place. Now we'll further see what happens. Hari Om.